Hi there, I'm Eitan, and welcome back to the Wix Wiz. In this second video of the Wix Gallery series, we're finally going to be hopping into Velo, and in this video we're going to be touching on just the basics, so how to set and get the items of your gallery with Velo, how to explore different gallery capabilities, and how to tap into different events such as clicking on an item or navigating between different parts of your gallery in order to create custom features. So if you want to learn how to do all that and more, let's get started. So to get started, we're going to be exploring the various properties and methods that galleries have when using Velo code. So to get started with Velo code, if you haven't done so already, you'll want to go up here to where it says Dev Mode, and then go right over here and click Turn on Dev Mode. Now it says Turn off Dev Mode because I already turned Dev Mode on. And once you do so, then you'll have this panel here on the bottom where you can begin to write your code. And in order to write code for one of these galleries, first I'm going to rename it. So I'm going to select the gallery, and I'm going to go right over here to the side, okay, and I'm going to change the gallery ID. So I'm going to call this my grid gallery, and I'm going to also change the name of my other gallery that I have right over here, and this is going to be my slideshow gallery. And I've added the two of them because I want to show some differences between these two galleries when we're accessing them with Velo code. Okay, great. So I have both of my galleries named, and now we're going to be going through some of the properties and methods that you can also find here inside of the Velo documentation. If you're wondering how to get to this documentation, you can either search on Google, or if you go back into the editor, you can see here you have the API reference gallery element. If you click that, it will take you to the documentation that I just showed you. And within the documentation, we can see all of the different properties and methods with regard to galleries. And the difference between properties and methods is that properties are certain values that you can either read or set for the gallery. And methods are more like functions, so things that you can do with the gallery. So like on current item changed, well, that's more like an event. But for example, play, that would be a method or a function. And what we're going to be doing is exploring some of these. As you can see, there are quite a lot, and most of these are generic, so they are properties or methods that apply to many or all of Wix elements, and they're not very specific to galleries. Some things that are specific to galleries is, for example, this items, which will allow us to read these specific items within a gallery. So let's try using this on each of our two galleries and see what we get back. So I'm going to go back to the editor, and here inside of the code, I'm going to, inside of our onReady function, I'm going to select, for example, our grid gallery, and I'm going to tap into the items property. And in order to make better use of this items property, I'm going to assign the value that I get back here to a variable. So I'll call this gallery items. And then under here, I can add a console log, console.log, and I'm going to log the gallery items. So now that I have that basic code set up, I'm just going to go ahead and hit format, and I'm going to go into preview mode. And here in preview mode, so you can see right over here in this line, this is the log that I set up in the code. And currently it's showing array 0, which is a little confusing considering that there are 6 items currently inside of this gallery. But if we hop over to the documentation and we scroll all the way down here within items, then we can see that Wix actually explains this to us and says that you can only get the items of a pro gallery with the items property if you set the items using the items property. So this already starts to highlight the difference between different Wix galleries. As I demonstrated in the previous episode of this tutorial, let me just head back into the editor. So here, if we go to add elements and we go to galleries, then you can see here that there are quite a few different kinds of galleries. Okay, so there are a lot of different kinds of galleries, and each of these might interact slightly differently with the code. So just for example, if I go ahead and I go back to our code that we wrote over here, and instead of grid gallery, I change this to be our slideshow gallery, and then I go ahead and go into preview mode now, then we can see that when we get back this log, it has 12 items, and these are the different items inside of this slideshow gallery. Okay, so this is one example of different behavior between different galleries, and all of these differences should be highlighted somewhere in the documentation. So if you're trying to do something with a gallery and it's not working, it's most likely that you missed something in the documentation. Then again, sometimes documentation can be wrong, and that's when you'd want to reach out to Wix support. So here inside of the item, so you can see it's an array of objects, and each one of these objects essentially has information about the specific media that's being displayed. So the type, the source, which is an internal URL to where that's stored inside of your media manager, a description, title, height, and width. And these are things that we can also read, but these are things that we could also set. So if I want to set the items of the media gallery, I can kind of turn this on its head and set the items by myself. So let's go about seeing how we would set the items of a gallery using Wix code. So what I've done over here is I've gone back to my grid gallery, and I've also gotten this URL to a random image on the internet. And one of the advantages of setting up your gallery this way is that you can actually use images that aren't even stored inside of your Wix media storage. Again, if you have permissions to display these images, I'm just using it for educational purposes here. So let's start by storing this URL to this image in a variable. So I'm just going to go over here inside of our onReady function, and I will say const example image, and I'm just going to copy over this URL and put it inside of a string and get rid of these over here. Let me just do some cleanup to make sure that I don't have any errors here. Okay, so essentially just my URL in a string, and I'm assigning it to this example image variable. Next, we need to arrange our array of items. So let's declare a new variable, and it'll be const items. And this is going to be an array of objects, and each object is going to have various properties that we just saw inside of the documentation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy over an example from the documentation to use as a template, and then we'll fill that out by ourselves. So let me hop back here to the documentation, and here is an example of setting the list of items for the gallery. And we can see here that this is the list of the different things that we need to assign. And as you see, not all of them are 100% necessary. I don't see instructions here as to what is optional and what is required. Definitely the source is going to be something that we need, because if we don't have the source, then that is going to be a problem for us because there's not going to be anything to display. I imagine type is also quite important, and possibly title. But definitely just with these three you should be good, because that's what they have here in the example. So let me go ahead and copy over these three, head back to the editor, and I'm just going to paste them right over there. I'm going to do some cleanup just to make it in the format that I like here. But essentially these are the same. And so the type we're going to leave as image because we're displaying an image. The title, I'll change it to be example image. And as for the source, instead of this URL that we have here, I'm going to be assigning the example image URL. Okay, and the last thing that we'll need to do is to assign these items to our grid gallery. So that's what we're going to do over here. So let me select our grid gallery. And I'm going to say dot items should be equal to items. Okay, and now let's head over into preview mode. And you can see that my grid is displaying the random image from the internet. And also, if we go over here and we take a look at the values of the items inside of this gallery, this pro gallery, we now can see it because we assigned those items to the pro gallery. Okay, so this is that was a short demonstration of how you can read items from a gallery with Velo code, how you can assign the items to a gallery, and a note about the differences between different galleries. Next, I want to hop in and show you another useful tool for discerning the different capabilities of your Wix galleries. Okay, so as I mentioned before, different galleries have different capabilities, and it's quite important for us to understand which capabilities our gallery has so that we don't try and do things with Velo that aren't possible and get super frustrated. So in order to know what the capabilities of your gallery are, you can use a certain property on the galleries, and that is this gallery capabilities, okay, named quite appropriately. So let's take a look at our two different galleries that we have set up and see what their capabilities are and if they differ in any way. So let me head back here into the editor, and I'm going to say const grid capabilities equals 2, and then we'll select the grid gallery, and I'll say gallery capabilities. And let's do the same for our other gallery. So const slide show, I think I called it, capabilities, capabilities equals 2. I think I spelled something there wrong, but it's fine. Equals 2. And then I'm going to select our slideshow gallery capabilities. And now let's add in logs. So first I'll log console.log grid and the grid capabilities. And I'll set up another log for our slideshow and slideshow capabilities. Awesome. So let's go and head into preview mode. And if we take a look here at the developer console, then here we can see the different capabilities. So let's open up grid. So we see here is playable is false. So we can't play a grid. So like if you can imagine a slideshow, I imagine is something that we can play. So is playable true, as opposed to a grid, which is not playable, because a slideshow you kind of view each one at a time, so you can play it, whereas a grid you can't play. Has current item also is false for our grid because we see all the items at the same time, whereas our slideshow has a current item. Our grid also doesn't have navigation buttons, whereas the slideshow does have navigation buttons. And the advantage of our grid is that it supports all media types, whereas slideshow does not support all media types. And let's see what exactly that means in terms of not supporting all media types. So I don't see that actually listed here inside of the documentation. So basically, if you encounter some kind of problem assigning a certain media type to your slideshow, then know that that's the reason. Or give Wix a phone call if you want to learn more. But basically, this gives us a lot of insight into what we're able to do. So for example, here we have a current item property, but we can't use this Velo property with the grid, for example, because it doesn't have current item. So it's always worth checking what the capabilities of the gallery you're working with are. And you can also, if you're writing some kind of generic code, then you can also condition certain behaviors based on the capabilities of the gallery. And that way, if you have multiple galleries, you can write more dynamic code. Or if you're simply kind of writing a one case scenario, you can just check it up quickly before you start to write your actual code for your gallery. So now that we've covered getting and assigning items to a gallery with Velo code, as well as understanding different galleries' capabilities, I want to do a short exercise which will help us practice some of the other methods and properties of galleries using Velo code. And what we're going to be doing is we are going to be adapting a slideshow gallery so that we have underneath it a display of which item out of how many total items there are in the slideshow. So for example, if I'm sliding through the slideshow and I'm currently on slide 3, it will say 3 out of 12, assuming that there are 12 slides total. And as I continue to slide back and forth, it will change that number accordingly. The next thing that we're going to do is that when you click on a specific slide from the slideshow gallery, it will display that image that you just clicked on here on the side in this side image. And I know that this isn't super functional and whatever you're trying to do on your site might be just a tad more complicated, but I am hoping that this will give you some valuable tools and thought processes for how to approach the issues that you might be having on your site. So let's open up our code editor. And let's start with our number display over here. So the first thing that I'm going to do, like before, is I'm going to rename this. And I'll just call this the slide number display. And what we're going to do is we are going to initially program it to show the 0 out of the total amount of slides that this slideshow has. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say const gallery items equals 2. And here we're going to have the slideshow gallery like we had before, dot items. And now that we have all of the items from the gallery stored here in this variable, essentially what we can do is we can know how many items there are. And I'm going to create a new variable, so const total item count equals 2 gallery items dot length. And now that I have that total count, we can essentially assign a value to our display. So I'm going to select our slide number display dot text, and this will be equal to, and here I'm going to be using a template literal, so it'll be equal to, let's say 1 out of, and here we're going to have the total item count. Okay, assuming that we're always going to start off on slide 1. And let's just take a look at what this looks like in preview mode. So if I go here into preview mode, then you can see now that we're on 1 out of 12 because we have 12 items total and we're currently on 1. And I mean, we have this little display here as well, but I'm assuming that kind of you want it outside of your slideshow. I'm just kidding. We're just doing this to practice, to be honest. So let's, and here now we move to 2 out of 12. So I want my display to also say 2 out of 12. So in order to do that, let's take a look at the documentation and see what we can use here in order to facilitate that. So above current item, you can see here that we have something called current index, and it gets the index of the gallery's current item. So that sounds super useful in terms of what we want. And just to note that because this is an array, the indices will start at 0, or at least because they set up this API to behave like an array. So that means that the first item is essentially 0 in terms of the current index. But we can work with that inside of our code. So let me head back to the editor here. And we are going to want to set this up whenever there is a change inside, whenever essentially our current item is changed. And luckily, we have an API for that as well. Sorry, I didn't show you that before, but if we go down here to on current item changed, so basically this is a function that's going to run every time that the current item changes, which is exactly when we want to change our number as well. Okay, so let's go back to our editor now and set up that event listener for our gallery. So I'm going to select our gallery, slideshow gallery dot on current item changed. And then in here, we're going to have what's called a callback function, a function that runs whenever this event occurs. And what we're going to be doing is we are going to say that const index equals 2, and then we'll get the slideshow gallery dot current index, and then we will assign that here to the value of our slide number display. So let me copy that over. And here, instead of 1, we're just going to change it to, say, index. Okay, and let's take a look and see what this looks like in preview mode. Okay, so 1 out of 12, and I changed it, and I forgot to do something important. Let's see if you can think. Comment right now below if you know what I missed, because I did give a hint before. So if you know what's wrong, then do comment below. And now I'm going to show you what it is. So you can see here that we're always one number behind the actual number of the slides. And that has to do with what I said and then quickly forgot, which is that the indexes over here are start from 0. So if we want the first slide to be 1 and not 0, we essentially have to add 1 to this index. Okay, so right over here, we're going to need to add in 1, and then it should display exactly as we expect. So let me just go into preview mode to double check that. And you can see here, so 1 out of 12, so we're good. And now 2 out of 12, 3 out of 12. If we go back, then it continues to adjust. And we can work on making this code a little more dry, that is like less repetitive. But since that's not the point of this tutorial, I'm going to leave it at this, and we'll hop over to talking about how to display the image that you just clicked here in this image here on the side. Okay, so in order to display an image here on the side, when we click on one of the images in our gallery, we are going to be using the onItemClicked method. But before we set that up, we are going to need to make sure that when we click an item in our gallery, nothing else is happening. So just to show you now, if I go into preview mode and I click on one of the items in our gallery, it will kind of open up in this expanded display, but I don't want that to happen. Instead, I want my custom behavior to occur. So there are two ways that we can prevent this expansion. One is by just going into the settings of this gallery. So let's just go over here into settings, and we can see here that when clicked, okay, they open in a pop-up, and I can change this to be nothing happens. Okay, so that's one way that we can deal with that. Another way that this could have potentially been solved is also using code. And we can see here that we can set the click behavior, so click action. And if we would have set that over here to none, then it would have had the same effect. Likewise with expand or link, depending on the behavior that we would have wanted. So now that we've disabled the native behavior of the click for our pop-up, for our slideshow, what we can do is create our own custom behavior. So let's go back to the editor, and I'm going to open up the code panel. And the first thing I'll do is I'm going to rename this image over here. So let's call this display image. And now we can hop over here into our code, and we're going to set up the event for when an item is clicked. So let's start off by selecting our gallery. So slideshow gallery dot on item clicked. And here we're going to have a callback function, but here inside of our callback function, we're also going to tap into the event. And the event is that click. And this event also can store within it different information. So if we take a look over here back at the documentation, so on item clicked, let me find that, on item clicked. So you can see here that the event has the property of item. So we can extract specific information regarding the item that has been clicked. For example, the item description or the item index and other properties of the item as well, such as the source. And that's really what we're going to want to tap into here. So let me head back to the editor. And now that we have this event, I'm going to say const image source equals to event.item.source. And now all I need to do is take that source and assign it to the image on the side. So let's say display image dot source equals to image source. And just for the beauty of it, let's also expand our image after we assign it. So display image dot expand. And what I'll do here on the side is I'll go and I will collapse this image by default. So it won't be shown by default, only after we click on an image from our slideshow will we see it on the side there. So let's test this out. I'm going to go into preview mode. And let's move through our slideshow a bit. And now I'm going to try clicking on one of these images, and boom, you can see it here appear on the side. And if I scroll a little bit more, click on that, then it goes ahead and it changes the source of the image. So with that, we're going to wrap up today. I hope this wasn't too complicated because this is only the start. In the next episode, we're going to be talking a lot more about Velo and slightly more complex things that we can do using galleries and Velo code. So if you want to not miss that episode, then go ahead and subscribe to the channel. If there are any things that you want to see with regard to Wix Galleries later on in this series, please do leave a comment below because I am still building the series and there is still room to add more content here. And as always, if you appreciate this video and you liked it, go ahead and give a thumbs up, and I'll see you next time.